will just state for the record then, so we have it on the recording, that my name is Michelle Marino, and this is Ben Bauman, and we are sitting down with Charlie Brown, and today's date is Friday, January 24th. Yes, 2020, and we are at his home in Gary, Indiana. So I just wanted to start by asking, when and where were you born?
I was born in Williston, South Carolina. My parents left there when I was 2 years old. Okay. So I have no recollection of my hometown. I was raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That's where I spent, I used to say a majority of my life, but majority of my life has now been in Gary, Indiana.
Mm-hmm. And how come they relocated?
It was just something that all the movies, the historical movies, tell you that most African Americans left the South because of the horrible treatment in the South, and one relative obviously had migrated to the northern states and would always say, "Oh, y'all come on up. There's employment, there's good accommodations, etc." Mm-hmm. So that was the reason my parents left. Yeah. Following, I think, my mother's sister at that time.
Okay. And what were your parents' names?
Charlie Brown and Ruth Brown.
Okay. And what was her maiden name?
Hickson. That is the more historical name, Hickson. All of my relatives, most of the still living ones, are in the South, in Augusta, Georgia.
Okay. Is that
Hickson, okay. Hickson.
Okay. And so had both of your parents grown up in South Carolina then?
In Georgia.
In Georgia.
Yes.
And then they came to South Carolina and then?
Yes.
Okay. What were your parents' occupations?
My mother was a homemaker. Mm-hmm. My father was in the cleaning business, cleaning clothes business. In fact, he left. I didn't grow up with a father. It was just my mother, my sister, and I. And my father left Philadelphia when I was 8 or 9 years old, and he moved to Los Angeles, California, where he started his own business, a clothes cleaning business.
Okay. And so you mentioned a sister. Was that the only sibling you had?
Yes, just the two of us.
And is she older than you?
She's a year and 8 months. She was a year and 8 months, so she's gone on now.
Mm-hmm. And what was her name?
Jean, Anna Jean Brown. Her married name, Anna Jean Butcher.
Okay. How would you describe your childhood?
I would think it was very normal. Growing up in Philadelphia and in that far back, I'm 81 now, close to 82. There were no issues about children in the neighborhood. The neighborhood was a rallying cry. We didn't have the issues of being afraid to go outside and play. It was just like some of the commercials say, you better be home when that street light comes on, because we go outside and play all day long.
Uh-huh. And so it was like a close-knit neighborhood?
Yes. Yeah. If a neighbor would probably pop you on the head or spank you doing something wrong, and also tell your parents, so it was like a double whammy.
Yeah. Okay. Who were the most influential people in your childhood?
My uncle, my mother's younger brother, Isaac Hickson. In fact, it was three of my mother, her brother Isaac Hickson, and her sister Rebecca Pryor all lived on the same block on this street in Philadelphia. So everybody was so close knitted at that time.
Yeah. Okay.
So Isaac Hickson was like a father to me.
Mm-hmm. Did you have cousins and things growing up next to you, or?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Well, what understanding, if any, did you have about your family's politics or political beliefs as a young kid?
None, in fact, except for one. When President Roosevelt died, and I was still very young, and I walked into my mother's bedroom and she was crying. And that was why, because she was sad over the death of President Roosevelt. That point, that was all. it's another commercial similar to this where then it wasn't everybody. There wasn't a television in the house, let alone every room like it is now. And so your entertainment and news was through the radio, and it was nothing unusual for everyone to gather around the radio to get the news or to listen to one of the myriad of stories that was on at that time.
And maybe correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure if I caught this at the beginning, but you said you were born in South Carolina. But did you say what was your birth date?
3/8/38, March 8th, 1938.
Would you have any early memories of World War II? I mean, you mentioned Roosevelt, but as a young child?
We were far removed from war at that time. I remember Pearl Harbor. I remember because that was a very explosive period of time. And then you would hear of soldiers coming home, occasionally seeing a soldier on the streets in their uniforms, and that was probably about the extent of engagement in war.
Sure. Okay.
Well, moving towards your educational background, what schools did you attend as a child and as a teenager?
My elementary school, we lived right across the street from my elementary school. I remember so vividly, I'm going into kindergarten. And so I was up and my mother dressed me, I totally oblivious of school at that point. And she dressed me and we went to the corner, crossed over and went into the school. And I was excited to be in there with all these kids, but she wanted to leave me there. I thought that we were just in the building to do something. And boy, did I cry. And I remember my classmates were on the floor painting, and they had newspapers on the floor so the paint wouldn't get on the floor. And she started to leave me there, and I ran across some of that and fell and slipped, and I remember having paint all over my clothing and my body because I was not to be left in that school.
Yeah. And what about middle school? Was the adjustment easier, shifting towards a...
Well, middle school was farther away. Yeah, that's another interesting thing that I walked to middle school, and it was quite a distance from where I lived. But nonetheless, there was no issue of going through various neighborhoods or streets, whatever, during those years. When I went on to high school, excuse me, I did have to catch the bus because there wasn't many neighborhood schools other than the elementary school.
Right.
And I said I had to walk a distance to middle, we call it junior high school.
Right.
But in the case of high school, and it was no, if you lived in this area, you were designated to go to the school. You made a choice as to what school you wanted to, and you had to get there. So my choice was to go to this all-boys school, Northeast High School, which was quite a ways away. In fact, I had to catch 2 trolleys or buses, I think, in order to get there.
Were the schools integrated
Oh,
in your
yes.
area?
Oh, very much so. In fact, the elementary school was not. The middle school was not. The high schools, all of the high schools, I think, were well integrated at that time.
And what was the name of your high school?
Northeast High School.
So why did you choose to go to an all-boys school?
Now that is, I don't know. I really, yeah, you look like you want to be around the girls at that time. But, I know why. Northeast High was known for its athletic prowess at that time.
Sure. So how would you describe your educational experiences throughout your school career?
It was very, very challenging, mainly because, I wasn't that much into geometry and trigonometry. First of all, backing up to junior high school, I was unaware that I was excelling in junior high school.
Right.
When I got to high school, everybody's in this auditorium, freshmen, and they were calling out names and sending you to whatever class you were going to be in. I looked around, and there were very few of us left in the auditorium because they had it designated. The one section was the boys that had excelled, and we were in a kind of accelerated group.
Right.
And at that point, there were only two. Maybe there was only two of us African Americans were in this, going into this accelerated freshman class.
Okay. Wow.
Which kind of frightened me to see that everybody, most of the boys in the auditorium had gone on to their class, but in fact, I even asked him, I said, well, what about me? And he says, well, you'll find out in a minute. And we went on to this group, and boy, it was different, mainly because we had trigonometry and algebra advanced, so we were kind of
right.
different than the other ones.
Yeah, okay. Wow. Did you have any favorite subjects in school?
Math.
Math?
Yeah.
Okay.
I always enjoyed math.
Nice. What about extracurriculars? What did you do?
Basketball.
Basketball?
Just love basketball.
What position did you play?
Center.
Center.
I mean, and now you rarely will find a guard
Right.
at my height.
Exactly, yeah.
But I was tall by comparison then, and played center. That was a different experience too, because even though the school was majority white, African Americans probably dominated the sports at that
Right.
time. I mean, were considered the start, always on the starting team.
Right.
If you can put it that way.
Yeah, okay.
Did you guys have a good program, a good basketball career
Oh
in high
yes.
school?
Oh yes. In fact, there were rivalries out of this world, and really interesting that there were some top athletes that came out. I don't know if the name Herb Adderley means anything to you all. He went on. He played football. He excelled in basketball, football, and track. And he went on. He chose football, and he played for the Green Bay Packers.
Oh, wow.
And in fact, I remember when they retired his jersey from the Green Bay Packers. And then there was Guy Rogers, who professional basketball, and he played for the Philadelphia 76ers and
Wow.
the Golden State Warriors.
Oh, wow.
I think about, here's the most interesting story of all. Ed Bradley, who recently died, he was on 60 Minutes. We went to college together. Oh, am I getting too far?
No, that's
ahead.
good.
Yeah.
We went to college together, Cheney State Teachers College. Now, we are the oldest institution of higher learning for African Americans in the entire United States. Even though Howard gets credit for that, Howard University in D.C., that's because Cheney, Cheyney, was not in the historical black college because it was a part of the state's higher ed group, and it was there because of the 13 colleges in the Pennsylvania groups. Cheney was the one that was predominantly for African Americans, and at the time that I was in college, you only had three choices: elementary ed, industrial arts, or home economics. So that meant that I was in, my major was elementary ed, but one of the students there was Ed Bradley, who recently, I think it's been gone now about 8-10 years. And interesting story about him. As I stated, we were elementary ed majors. But he volunteered from Cheney to go out on when they were having some kind of riots in Philadelphia, and he volunteered to go out and interview people. And from that, he then went to being a disc jockey on the radio, and then sports. He covered sports for CBS because he would come out this way many a day, and ultimately winding up on 60 Minutes. And you know, and there are probably hundreds or more of my classmates or my fellow Cheneyites that we at this small, very small teachers college, but branched out into all kinds of professions, you know. And Ed Bradley stands out simply because trained as an elementary ed teacher, winds up on 60 Minutes, a national television show.
Wow, that's really neat.
Wow. So, yeah, go ahead.
And then college, I'm about to graduate now from Cheney in 1961. Right before graduation, there are some recruiters from the Gary school system, the Gary Community School Corporation, on the Eastern Shore recruiting elementary ed teachers. Well, I had two real close buddies. The three of us were always together. I was the captain of the basketball team, the other one captain of the football team, the other one captain of the track team.
Wow.
And we were just buddies. We joined the same fraternity. Now, the recruiters are there, and the dean of men stopped us. We were on our way to dinner one night, and he says, "When y'all finish dinner, come on back down to the lounge. There's some recruiters here trying to get teachers." Didn't pay much attention to that because it was unheard of for someone to think of packing up and moving from your home to mid America.
Right.
So we went down and they introduced themselves to assistant superintendents from the Gary school system, and they interviewed us, and we, at least I blasé through the interview because I know that, yeah, I'll listen to you and I'll answer your questions and so forth. They wanted us to sign contracts on the spot. I said, hold up.
Wow.
I said, you know, this takes a lot of thinking. It was the farthest thing from my mind to think about leaving Philadelphia and moving to a place I had never heard of, Gary, Indiana. I don't know if the Music Man was out then. That was the only reference I had to Gary, Indiana.
Sure.
So all three of us had the contracts that they wanted us to sign. They said, well, take your time, talk to your parents, then mail us the contracts. And all three of us had basically the same thoughts, you know, I'm not thinking about leaving Philadelphia. The hook was the fraternity that we were members of was founded at Indiana University.
Oh.
And in 1961, it was celebrating its 50th anniversary. So that was kind of a big thing. You know, we wanted to come out for the 50th year celebration. Sure. So then it clicked. We want to go to Bloomington to the Kappa celebration. We could go on to Gary, Indiana, which can't be, we don't have a sense of geography. If Gary can't be that far away, we then could go on to Gary and teach for a year, then come on back home. That was the master plan in 1961. I still have to shake my head when thinking about that, how young folk rationalize things. So we came here.
All three of you came?
There's another hook in here. Two of us were elementary ed. The other one was an industrial arts major. The recruiters weren't interested.
Yeah.
So when they kept calling regularly, and here we are bartering with them. We said, well, you know, you offered two of us jobs, but there's our friend, the third one, you didn't offer him a job as an industrial artist. They said, hold on, just I'm really cutting it short. Hold on, we'll find something. They called back in a couple of days. We found he has an offer also, so send all 3 contracts. They found a job for him.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, I mean, and here's a very, very interesting thing, unbeknownst to us at the time. 61 was our first year, and I taught through 68. Through that period of 7 years, Gary was the highest paying school system in the entire United States.
Wow.
At that point, I think Philadelphia was paying $49,000 for a first year teacher.
They don't even make that today.
Gary was paying $5,050, which was the highest salary for a first year teacher. So we said, we all agreed. One of them, who's still here with me, Eugene Johnson, who's retired from the school system, had an old beat up car that we packed up and drove to Bloomington. And then the other interesting thing was the school system had a set up through homeowners or from people that had apartments for rent. All we had to do was show up. They had found us an apartment. All we had to do was go in there, hang up our clothes, and get ready to go to work, which was really intriguing to me. I don't know if that happened across the country at that time, and for certain, I don't even know if it happens today with anyone. But we came in here, and that first year, we were having fun. It was like an extension of college life. You know, we were the big 3 on campus. We come here, and the word spread in Gary, Indiana. There are 3 young men from Philadelphia that are just, you got to see them, you know. So, I mean, we'd even see cars driving down our street and pointing up to, that's where they live, up there.
Wow.
That first year went by, we were having so much fun, we said, well, maybe we need to stay another year. Because that first year, it's summertime, we were supposed to be going back home, and we were just having fun, and it hadn't even crossed our mind that the year's up. And 1 year turned into 2, and 2 into 3, and so forth. Finally, 1967, the end of the school year, I said, for certain, I'm out of here. I had brought my college sweetheart out here. And she didn't much like the small town living compared to Philadelphia. And in the spring break of 1967, we had made arrangements to go back to Philadelphia and apply for teaching jobs there. The only thing that threw that out of whack was I was active in the teachers union. In fact, I was the building representative and also one of the officers of the teachers union here in Gary. And Richard Hatcher decided to run for mayor in 1967. One of his campaign managers was also a teacher, and he came to me and asked, since I was in the union, to try to organize teachers to support Hatcher for mayor. And at that point, teachers were kind of standoffish in politics. It was beneath them to be involved in politics. But the little small organization I pulled together, we were very successful in getting a considerable number of teachers to support him for mayor. He won. He was about to take office in January of 1968. I'm planning on leaving April of 67 to go back to Philadelphia to find a job. Right before the spring break, I get a call from his office asking me to come down to City Hall on my lunch break. I'm thinking, well, they want us to try to keep that teachers group together since, it's not a one-time deal. I get down there and he offers me a job with this administration. I said, wow. What do I do? I'm shocked, in fact. Mainly because I'm thinking about, I'm getting out of here. I'm going back home to Philadelphia. I offered a lot of excuses. I said, wow, I don't know anything about municipal government. Well, Gary was an urban laboratory at that point. The first African-American mayor of a major city. I mean, there were just all kinds of technical assistance available. You could walk into his office and there were grants laying all around, you know, where people were offering assistance to make sure that he was successful. I said, well, they said, that's not a problem. We can get you the technical assistance. I said, well, I'm under contract for the school system. I'm offering all kinds of, they said, the mayor picked up the phone and called a school board member and said, can a teacher get a leave of absence? And ultimately the answer was yes. I ran out of excuses or trying to roadblocks to get away from this. I said, well, let me talk this over with my wife. I told her what had happened, and she says, well, if you want to try it, we can stay. And boy, that was the beginning of the end for me in terms of an education that was not formal, like getting a college degree. You know, I know as a teacher, we had a lesson plan book that Monday through Friday from 8 to 3 or whatever the time was, you knew hour by hour for the 5 days exactly what you were going to do. Totally different in municipal government. I mean, it was just helter-skelter. And it was not 8 to 3. It was work until the work is done. And boy, it was like baptismal fire there in terms of my experience, and it was the most unique experience that I will never ever forget. And so it also creates hardships on families too, because after 3-4 years in, I was divorced from my first wife because it was bringing her along with what's all going on in your new life, because both of us are teachers and knew about the structure of that, but this, my goodness. So I'm now divorced, and I must have had 2 or 3 jobs in Hatcher's administration, each one of them very similar, but it was a different grant each time, from the mayor's assistant on youth programs to the Youth Services Bureau to risk manager, all of those things over his period in office from 68 through the whole 20 years that he's in office. I'm a part of his administration.
Did you find that you could take skills that you had as a teacher into this new work, or how did you feel about
trying to do that structure of, okay, hour by hour, here's what I need to try to accomplish in this new job? But that was the extent of it, you know. You just had to fly by the seat of your pants in municipal government, boy.
Wow.
And so now I'm down to 1982, 81. I'm saying I'm definitely going back home. I'm getting out of here and going back to Philadelphia. All of a sudden it comes up, Charlie Brown would be an excellent choice to run for state representative for the 3rd district, because the guy that was in there wasn't, he and the mayor didn't get along too well. I said, oh no, not me. I love politics, was always engaged in politics, but behind the scene. I never even viewed myself as an elected official. I didn't like certain ties. I was always viewed as a rebel because I carried a big bag, shoulder bag, just wasn't doing the normal things. And I always had support from some of the mayor's top assistants because he said, well, he's working in youth programs. He shouldn't be in a shirt and tie all the time. I said, Lord, thank you on that. So I got pressure then for go ahead and run for the state rep seat. We will support you financially, whatever. I said, that just is not me. And it kept going on. And I said, okay, I did it more as a dare. I didn't think that I could win, not being suited for that. Suited meaning.
Yeah.
But I won. I did it as a dare and I won. I said, now I'm thinking about going home, back to Philadelphia, and here is the second time I get a challenge that I accept and that prevents me from going back. I said, boy, I guess it just was not meant for me to get back home to Philadelphia.
Well, what shaped your political outlook? Like as you're starting to get into elected positions and obviously being a part of Mayor Hatcher's administration,
Yeah.
what was your political outlook at the time?
It was mainly, that's interesting because I hadn't even thought about then what would be my concentration as a state representative. But somehow I had served on the Gary Community Mental Health Center. In fact, there's that picture. I thought there was a picture up there of me and Hatcher and Rosen Carter. And
Oh, it's back here, I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mental health in that early 80s, I guess, was being driven because there were major mental health issues. And we started out in a storefront with this mental health agency, and Rosalind Carter driving that issue. That this feds dumped a lot of money into this whole issue. In fact, that was a groundbreaking for the Gary Community Mental Health Center that was built here in Gary. And so health, I just got into health, and that was my foundation in the General Assembly from my beginnings to the time I walked out the door. I had a keen interest in improving the quality of health in the state of Indiana.
Well, I was jumping around a little bit.
Yeah,
I want to jump back.
Sure. So I guess you talked about how when you first moved to Gary, Indiana, you sort of had heard of Gary a little bit. What about Indiana as a state in general? Did you know much about Indiana or Hoosiers or?
No.
No.
In fact, it took a long time before the three of us. Oh, by the way, not just the three of us came. There were 13 of us that came from Cheney State Teachers College at that point that accepted the challenge of coming halfway across the country, and we were all teased about our kind of Eastern accent.
Yeah.
That was a long way from how the way people talk here.
Yeah.
Oh boy. And they kind of viewed us as kind of snooty, simply because of the way we talk.
Right.
I've kind of lost my, I think, Eastern accent now.
Well, you've been here long enough
Yes.
at this point, I think. So.
But no, I didn't. I knew absolutely
Didn't know
nothing about
Yeah.
Indiana at that point.
So before you got to Indiana and you were in college, you mentioned that you played basketball in college as well.
Yes.
And were you a part of any other clubs or organizations in college?
Nothing other than fraternity. Very,
Right.
very active in the fraternity.
And what was the name of the fraternity? You said Kappa. But,
Kappa Alpha Psi.
I think we have a historical marker for them. Sorry, did you have any others?
I guess it's talking more about your college experiences. Sort of big picture. Did you really enjoy college? What was your takeaway from it?
Integral part of my life. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, here, when you think about a small, very small state teachers college, 99.9 of the students are African Americans, knowing full well that, you know, that all of the teachers drove us to how important teachers are. You know, and it's still hard to understand how it is that teachers are so very, very low on the totem pole in terms of compensation. Yet teachers teach lawyers, teachers teach doctors, you know, all of the other professions that are compensated much higher than teachers. But that was the major focus, that you're the foundation of life for all of those little kids that are going to grow up. You know, so you have to make sure that you are the cream of the crop in terms of teaching.
What about in college? Did you start to develop any political ideas? Or
No, none whatsoever.
No interest. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I know you said there were sort of limited options in terms of what you could do once you got to Cheney State, but what made you decide to be a teacher to begin with?
When I graduated, college was not in my background, my family's background. In fact, I think I was one of the first ones to go to college. I graduated and I immediately found a job in the U.S. Postal System in terms of mail carriers, sorting the mail for the guys going to deliver it out on the street, and was content with that, except that another friend of mine who graduated a year after I did, who had a different background, he had 6 or 7 brothers and sisters, and all of them had gone to college, and he was the youngest, so it was kind of ingrained in him that you are also going to go to college. He was going out to Cheney to register, and he asked me to go along with him. I was off from work that Saturday, I guess, and so I went out there and saw that campus. I said, wow, man, this is something I would like to do as well. I went back home that day and told my mother, I want to go to college. You know, it was that kind of basically, simply seeing that, and it was a very small college, as I stated. It was all the classrooms and the dorms were on a quadrangle. And it was just breathtaking to me. I said, no, I've got to go. Yeah. College was not that expensive, but back then in the 50s. In fact, when I went in 57, I think 56 or 57, I graduated in 56, and I spent a year in the post office, and then even though there wasn't much money in the house, between my mother, I wasn't saving much in my first year in the postal system. We scrapped together and got the money together for me to register there, and Katie barred the door. That was really, those 4 years were very, very valuable to me now. The relationships. I still, every week, once a week, even as we speak, there are 3 of my friends that I went to school with in Cheney that we are on the telephone talking to one another, and the one that is still here. So between the 4 of them, there's some kind of communications on a weekly basis between us.
That's great. Yeah.
Great.
My wife marvels at the fact that there's that kind of relationship after all these years.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you mentioned you married your first wife, and she was from Cheney State too, and she was a teacher. Did you have children?
Yes, one daughter.
One daughter.
My precious daughter. I didn't have a son, so we named her I got half of my name in there, Charlisa. And she went through the school systems here, and then she went to Spelman College in Georgia. Then she came back here and went to IU Med School.
Okay.
and this is something I will be forever angry with IU Med, that, and they kind of catered to me because I was chair of the Public Health Committee, and all of their wants had to come through my committee. But my daughter went through the 3 years of the classroom and even did her rotations, but she had difficulty passing the what's that test that the doctors have? The
MCATs?
No, the MCAT is that prepares you, I think, whatever that exam is that they have to get to be licensed. She had difficulty with that, and so she was eligible to graduate, but just like lawyers, you can't practice law until you pass the law exam. But Indiana had a policy of their own that you don't even graduate unless you have passed the MCAT or whatever that I'm losing.
Yeah.
Right.
And so she did all of the classroom work, but never ever completed so that she could practice medicine. So she messed around. Not messed around. She worked for a couple of the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
How did she get to Dallas? I think she met this guy, and they moved to Dallas because that's where he was from. And now I have 2 grandsons. Her husband died about 5 or 6 years ago. All that time she was just a full-time mom, and not to downplay the fact that is a job, that is a job, but she, other than the 2 or 3 years that she was working for pharmaceutical companies, she never practiced medicine. In fact, her years at med school served her well because she knows symptoms and whatever to do when those boys when they were growing up. They are now 14 and 15, and she has done a magnificent job as a mother, a single mother, a full-time mother with those 2 boys. I've often tried to encourage her to move back here to be closer, but I mean that's another irritant of mine, that most kids that grew up here and go away to school and are successful do not want to come back here. And it's mainly because even many of us here realize there's limited opportunities here in Gary. Gary has a very negative reputation that most of those kids that grew up here are aware of now. And when I talk to them one-on-one or in groups, I say, but you could be the future of Gary. You could turn all of that around, all those negative things that are directed at Gary, Indiana.
Sure. And so, your daughter was with your first wife?
Yes.
Is that right? And then, but you said you got divorced and you got remarried?
Yes.
When did you get remarried?
1990.
Put you on the spot here.
Yeah. I have it memorized sometimes, but we just celebrated our 28th anniversary.
Oh wow! Congratulations.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay, so we're jumping around a little bit,
Yes.
but back into sort of political outlook, and you were starting to talk about issues you were getting involved with, in the Hatcher administration, and then in your early career as a legislator. And you mentioned healthcare, but were there other issues like education or other things that, once you were getting into office or into politics that you really wanted to champion?
Yes, and education was one of those, and then just municipal government. The many cities were struggling because it was the up and down with the federal administration as to whether they were going to provide resources to struggling cities. But yes, those three mainly, municipal government and how to improve that, and especially the quality of life of people in struggling cities. And then education, since I came here and was involved in education for the beginning of my adult life, that was, in fact, I introduced the bill in at the Indiana General Assembly for Gary to change from an appointed school board to an elected school board. Because that was, I think at the point there were only about a dozen school corporations that had appointed school boards. That it was mainly done to, once more, involve and engage the citizenry more in the education process. That if I'm an elected school board member, I'm here to try to improve the education of our young people.
Did you have any national political heroes or state or local as you were entering the political scene?
My number one hero, naturally, is Mayor Hatcher, who just left us about 3 weeks ago. In fact, my biggest hero is Nelson Mandela. That's just amazing. I was in his presence once. There was an organization called the NBCSL, National Black Caucus of State Legislators. And ironically, again, there's the Philadelphia connection. Reverend Leon Sullivan in Philadelphia, who was a very, very innovative minister. He was a preacher, but he started OIC, Opportunities Industrial Corporation, that would get folk to not only do things in the United States, but to partner with other countries, and mainly African countries for African American legislators. And we went to South Africa once to visit and to establish a brotherhood of the state government there versus the various state governments here in the United States. And this, now Nelson Mandela is out of prison and back as the president. And I don't even know how we finagled an audience with him. There wasn't a chance for camaraderie or shaking hands or whatever. In fact, they encouraged us, please do not try to, have a conversation, whatever. But just that aura when he walked into the room was something unbelievable. It was like, I guess the same feeling as Jesus Christ walked into this room. I mean, it was a chill. I mean, I'm just starstruck at the fact that I'm in the same room, and there were 100 other legislators from around the country, but that I will never ever forget. Then we moved down to modern times of Barack Obama, once more saying that that's unheard of, that we're going to have an African American president, and then a young man, as young as he was, and then not a national name, had only been in the Senate one term or one and a half. One term, he was into a second term. But the fact that he had that kind of charisma and that groundswell of support, that you have to say he's someone very, very special.
Yeah. I guess coming to sort of when you first got involved in state government, did you have a particular campaign strategy at all when you first were running? I know you said you ran partly on sort of dare, but was there any strategy involved? Or?
Yeah, my name alone. Granted, I had a lot of naysayers. I never had a general, another thing about this end of the state, and mainly the city of Gary, we have not had a person that is a Republican as an office holder for a long, long time. So our struggle was always in the primary.
Right.
against another fellow Democrat. And most years I had one or more opponents. But the name was magic. In fact, when I first started out, I would always approach the children and tell them, go tell your mother to vote for Charlie Brown. And really, sincerely, that's what got me over in most cases. The younger kids that was fascinated by the name would encourage their parents to at least say, there's a Charlie Brown running? And so it was all, interestingly enough, I was at a conference in California, and one of the speakers, a panelist, was an attorney. His name escapes me, but he was the attorney for Charles Schultz. And so it was almost like begging. I said, I'm here for only a couple of days. I certainly would like to meet. I think at that point Charles Schultz had died and his wife was still alive. I said, I would like to meet her, mainly to make that kind of connection. I was older than the cartoon Charlie Brown, and so I said that you all use my name rather than the other way around. And there was some communications. He sent me a letter. He told me about how Schultz extended his garage and made a little studio, and he personally did all of the cartoons himself there in his garage right there on his property.
Well, speaking of your name real quick, is your legal name Charlie Brown, or is it Charles Brown, or do you have a middle name?
My birth certificate says Charlie Brown III. My grandfather, my father, and yeah, it is Charlie Brown.
That's great.
Which I used to always ask my mother, why would you give me such a silly name as Charlie Brown? Because it was a teasing point for all the kids, all of my peers back then. But I kiss her. I would kiss her all the time. I said, never question the wisdom of mothers, because that name was worth $1 million when I first ran for public office.
Sure, I'm sure it was.
And who was your main opponent when you first ran for office?
My main opponent?
Yeah.
A guy who was elected 2 terms before me, Rayfield Fisher. But I never did get, I guess he didn't consider doing what the mayor of the city wanted as much as the mayor wanted him to consider. So they had a falling out. And in between my winning in excuse me, 82, another guy did he did a half a term, who beat Rayfield Fisher, the original representative. There was a guy, Jules Blake Taylor. I think he still lives in Indianapolis, but he only lasted a half a term, and not even a half a term, as I think of it, because there was some dispute about his mother and father were divorced. One lived in the district within the third house district, one did not. He must have been living with whichever parent did not live in the district but used the address of the other. So this House of Representatives established a select committee to investigate the whole issue. Their findings was that his legal residence was outside of the district, therefore they unseated him and they put Rayfield Fisher, the gentleman that he beat, back in to fill that unexpired term. And so then came me, the next election around, and I defeated Rayfield Fisher in 82 and also in 84, where he came back and tried to reclaim his seat.
Wow. And what did it feel like when you first found out that you were getting elected?
Well, they told me I had to shave my beard. Well, some of the folk, there were kind of establishment types who were saying that you have to shave your beard, you have to tamp down your outspokenness, all of that. But that was not the case. I kept my beard, and I came in with a roar and a thunder.
Yeah.
One of my first, I picked up the mantle for trying to establish a Martin Luther King holiday bill in Indiana. Resistance personified. I mean, it just was not to be done. I mean, there was just so much hatred. I don't know if it was all directed at him as a person. It's just
right.
to name something after an African American in Indiana was just foreign, you know.
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 years, over and over again, I would introduce the bill, and then about the 4th year, it passed out of the House, but then it ran into that blockade over in the Senate. This is I have to give you all a copy of the chapter out of Hurley Goodall's book. Hurley Goodall was a legislator from Muncie. Mm-hmm. This particular year, he and Hurley Goodall and his senator, I'm blanking on his name, had identical legislation. And the Senate version had passed, so there was no need for the House version. No, I'm sorry, it was the reverse. The House version had passed, so there was no need for the Senate version. So we had this process, strip and insert, that you had a bill that was moving through one of the houses, and you wanted to make some changes. You could get the permission of the author and the sponsor and say, I want to put some other language, I want to take all the current language out and put new language in. And that's what we did in that Senate bill, stripped out the fireman's language that was in the original bill and put in the Martin Luther King language. Boy, oh boy, the Senate went bonkers over the fact that we used the process that they had been using for years. They walked out, they stayed off the floor for up to 2 weeks, I think it was, saying that this will not occur. We will not. I don't know which brought on their anger the most. The fact that we used the process that they were using, and the fact that we used the Martin Luther King holiday as the vehicle. The compromise came down to, okay, we will make it a non-code holiday. That meant just for that 1 year, and then it would have to start all over again in the next session. They relented, and they made it Senate Bill 1 and made Senator Virginia Blankenbaker the author of the bill, because they were so angry with me for circumventing what was the normal process. And that's the history of us getting, ironically, it's not much talked about much, but the national holiday was done by a Gary resident, Katie Hall, and then I carried the national holiday only impacted federal workers in the District of Columbia. And it was so worded that after that, every state had to enact their own legislation to make it a legal holiday.
Now, did yours in Indiana then, let me rephrase that. Had your portion of the bill, was that before the federal one, before Katie Hall and the federal one, or was that after that?
I think the federal one went in first.
First.
But that only affected federal workers.
Right.
Yeah. And very few people realize that, they look at the national holiday as Dr. King's birthday, but in fact, who was the last state? I think it was Arizona, or there's still a holdout, I think, for making it a holiday in two states.
So, after each time that you're reelected to the General Assembly, did you have any changes in your thoughts about what it felt like to be a part of the General Assembly, or did you just kind of get used to it after a while?
Well, I guess the changes came about when we first took over the majority.
Mhm.
I mean, you can achieve a lot more in
Sure.
majority than
Definitely.
you can in the minority, and I don't know exactly. I think we did that flip flop a couple of times while I was there, but I never ever gave much thought to. Am I going to just stay here to run every 2 years or what? It just became routine.
Right.
And I look back on why didn't I try to have in my head or in a notebook the history of every year or every session, every 2 year period, what was attempted and what was accomplished, and other little vignettes that occurred
Right.
along the way. That's the one thing I really regret, that I did not take the time to keep up with. As you, in that packet of information that you sent me, it indicates the basics of what I introduced, but then there's nothing, the real foundation and the guts of that is not down in writing.
Right. Did you change like campaign strategies at all, or anything, or you?
No, it
Just-
wasn't.
okay.
Even though I had opposition,
Mhm.
most of the time,
Right.
none of it was really serious.
Yeah.
And that I felt threatened by any
Sure.
of it. You know, I still had to outwardly. I couldn't be
Right.
so arrogant or cocky as to say, I'm not going to buy buttons or
Right.
yard signs or anything.
Yeah.
But only, I think one time when I knew I did not have, City Hall was going to send someone after me, that I had to really hustle.
Yeah.
But other than that, once you get entrenched, it is, and seniority means a lot. I mean,
Right.
most folk that are deep into politics know. Why would you change when that you send somebody new? They have to learn the whole process. You know, it takes
Right.
them a year to even know where the toilet is. So why would you change? You have a senior person who is up there in seniority, has committee assignments that are very important to us. So
Yep. Yeah, makes sense.
Sure. Well, for that very first election after you won, what did you think as you were walking into the State House?
you know what? When I walked in and when I walked out, I still had the same one thing in common. I never knew which end led to the parking lot versus. I always had to go to the center and look both ways to know, because it was so confusing, not keeping in mind I'm catching this elevator down, so that means I've got to go to my right versus to my left. But that is a magnificent building. Several times we attempted to kick out the Supreme Court and some others to give more space for the legislators. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, every person that's ever come down to visit during the session or whatever, and I take them to my office, they said, "What? This is your office?" I mean, we all cramped up. It's, you know, when you think about having to find space for 100 people and their staff. So that was all, and we came so close a couple of times, I know, of looking at building a building for the Supreme Court and all the other treasurer and auditor and all that, so we could at least spread out and have room for constituents that came down to visit.
Yeah, tight quarters in there. Well, how did you learn the ins and outs of state politics or of the General Assembly?
It was, you know, once more, flying by the seat of your pants. You know, most importantly, the group that is the key to what we do that the general public is not aware is LSA. I mean, there's no way you could, you give them a concept and they run with it, and it's unreal. You know, I say, I want to introduce legislation that says that Gary will no longer have the school board appointed by the mayor, that we will have, there's 6 councilmatic districts in Gary, and we will have, you have to live in each of the districts in order to be a representative on the school board. They said, well, you can't have an even number because, they may wind up in a tie. I said, okay, then we will have one person run at large. And have a 7-person district. And it took a while to get that concept through because some thought it was a matter of my wanting to get at whoever was in the mayor's office at that time, as opposed to there's a large segment of the community that was saying at the same time, the school board doesn't answer to the mayor who appoints them. It doesn't answer to the parents, doesn't answer to anyone. So we need to appoint them to let them know that we can remove you. So, and in doing that, I had to rely heavily on legislative services to craft and get that legislation together.
Who were your political mentors in those early years?
Chet Dobus, who is now, I think he spends most of his time in Florida. Bill Crawford, for sure. Bill Crawford was my buddy. Bill Crawford. Interesting man. No college training, but he had the wisdoms of Zeus. I mean, just plain old common sense. And Hurley Goodall. I cannot leave Hurley Goodall out, who was a fireman from Muncie, Indiana. But you're talking about the PhD in just wisdom of the process of the legislature. And just so folksy, when Hurley spoke, everybody listened, Julia Carson was there, but that was another interesting thing. The only time we came together was when we had the Indiana Black Legislative Caucuses come together to map out what we wanted to all make sure we were on the same page on. But from House to Senate, it was like never the twain shall meet. In terms, except if you were fortunate enough to get a bill out of the House, you had to send it to someone over there. Do you put your fellow African American on the bill first or second? Because the Senate was like hell. I mean, they would not even hear a piece of legislation unless a Republican was the first sponsor on the bill. So, and they, Lord have mercy. To think about how they rule with an iron fist. I compare it to the U.S. Senate, McConnell, even though he's got some real fences to mend in terms of this impeachment process, but he has a reputation of ruling with an iron fist over there.
Well, how did you know the needs and wants of your constituents? How did you interact with them?
It is a foregone conclusion that in the off season, or even while we are in session, to have public forums that you at least invite. There are many constituents that are astute enough to know what's going on down there, and also we have those surveys that we send out and say, what are your main interests in seeing legislation passed? Others will call or write you and say, I want you to support ABC. But mainly through public forums where on a Saturday, at least two times during the year, we would invite folk in and have them voice publicly or to us directly what they feel should or should not be done. We rely, at the surveys, we rely heavily on mailing out to every household in the district a form listing some questions and then leaving space for them to put their own comments on. And then that is compiled by the staff and then it shows us the issues that are most important to the constituents back home.
Okay. What do you remember? What was the first bill that you sponsored, or at least maybe the first important piece of legislation?
Yes. In fact, no, I had it framed.
Oh,
It was. It's interesting that you raised this because it came through my best friend who is here and that I told you just retired. He was at a shopping mall and he got the police. I don't know. Somehow, the police in that community gave him a ticket, or it may have been someone hit his car, and the police could not ticket him because the mall and its parking lot was considered private property, and that the police had no jurisdiction on that in terms of ticketing someone, and that was my first piece of legislation that says that the municipal police or the county police could do that, ticket someone for a violation or hitting, damaging someone's car on a mall parking lot.
So that just came about because your buddy you had known that had happened, and that's interesting.
Absolutely.
Well, you've alluded to this a little bit, but can you describe the regular interaction amongst assembly members, whether that was formal or informal? How did you treat each other, at least in the House?
Well, when you are in the majority, it's ironically, interestingly enough, and a Republican has a bill, you want to talk about a health issue, and I'm the chair of the Public Health Committee, they would come and talk about, well, some would, as opposed to just filing the bill and waiting to see what's going to happen and saying, man, this is very, very important to me, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, could you give this bill a hearing? And vice versa. When I have one bill and we're not in the majority, I would go to that health committee or that committee chair, whoever it was, and say, would you consider hearing my bill and give them the reasons why, this is very important to my district. So there was that interaction, and then, like I said, within the Black Caucus, if all of us solidify around a subject matter, then we knew we stood a very good chance of getting that through, especially when there are eight of us in one chamber and 5 in the other that were supportive of this. And it was a very narrow margin between Democrats and Republicans, and we knew that we could really get our point across because they knew they needed that block of votes to get that subject matter legislation through. But there weren't many occasions other than, the money issues were always the big issue of trying to get our point across in terms of getting more money in the budget for a given subject matter. And I mean, it's the difference in night and day if you are in the majority or in the minority. And that's when there was the big struggles in terms of getting things through, getting money for things that were very, very important to the African American community.
Well, can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I mean, throughout your 30 years, you've been in both the majority, and then the last few years, there was a Republican supermajority. I mean, just walk us through that a little bit about what that looks like and felt like to have been in the majority, but then in the minority as well.
Yeah. The minority is not a very good, comfortable seat. I mean, it's like sitting on a briar patch. But you find we should not throw a blanket over a party, because in many instances they're good-hearted Republicans, even though they're few in number. But nonetheless, there are some good-hearted ones that if you get their attention on an issue, that they can relate to or really accept the fact that this is harming or would be helpful to a large segment of the Hoosiers, then you can get that point across. I'm trying to think of something specific. I can't think of something, but it's all about personal relationships too. You know, rarely did I have ill feelings or create ill feelings coming the other way from my Republican colleagues. You know, it was a point. It's just over the last 6 years that it just is what you see on the federal level was at the local level here. That it used to be that we fuss and fight on the floor or in committee, but then go out and have a drink or have dinner together. That changed drastically over the last 6 or 8 years. That it was a total separation and isolation of the parties as it is at the federal level. I don't know what brought that on, that we just do not have that camaraderie any longer.
Do you think there was a recognition of that, like when that was happening, or is that something you've reflected upon, or could you feel it, you know, when you were still in office?
I think it was hardening of positions, and when those the guys that came in that were extremists, quote unquote, in my opinion, extremists in terms of being to the right, they just felt that that's it, you know, we in the majority and just run this thing on through here. And I think the greatest one was that whole issue of abortion and abortion rights and the gun issue. The gun issue, now, interestingly enough, the gun issue was not a Democrat-Republican issue, because there are as many Democrats who in the South and some up here in the North that believe in this whole issue of guns, you know. So that was not a division on party lines, but the philosophical lines, that whole issue of everybody should be able to have a gun because it's in the Constitution to bear arms. Mm-hmm. But in the urban areas, you got to understand and appreciate that you're not going to go hunting with the AK 47 or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But it's that whole issue of, and I don't think it's that true that the NRA has a stranglehold on those folks that are into the gun issue. It's just that they are saying we can't let them have an inch, because then it's going to move on down the line. So that's why they're so hard-nosed on absolutely nothing dealing with guns. You don't find that in any chamber that you're going to be able to impact the gun issue. Mm-hmm. And as I stated, the abortion issue and the religious stuff. Now that's what I firmly believe, that Governor Pence knew that he was not going to get a second term because of that crazy issue of the far-right conservative religious group. That he ran that legislation on through about religious rights, and it backfired on him, in fact. And then he's a very fortunate man that I don't know how Donald Trump decided that he would select him as his running mate, but it was a savior for Pence to get that offer from Donald Trump, that he wouldn't have that embarrassment of losing his second term. I don't think that has happened here in Indiana, that a governor did not get his 2 terms in office.
No, do you think because that was his stance with the Religious Freedom Act, and then also I know there was a lot of educational things going on at the time, so you felt like he was losing support here? Is that what I heard you saying?
Yes, very much so. Because it was an ongoing battle, and that's why they've ultimately made the decision that they will no longer elect the superintendent of public education, mm-hmm. which makes a lot of sense, because education is usually a major plank in the governor's platform, but yet it may not it may be contrary to what's coming from the elected person that's over education. And a couple of times, and we go way back to Nagley, I remember that name. He was elected the superintendent of public instruction, and I think, I don't know whether it was a money issue or what, that even both parties decided that we need to eliminate the office of superintendent of public instruction and let the governor select that, because that's always a major plank. That failed to eliminate the office back in the 70s, and now we finally looped around that they finally have done that, and they waited until it was a person of the same party, because they tried it with the prior superintendent who was a Democrat, but they knew that would just create total chaos trying to eliminate an office when it will appear as though it's because it's a person of the opposite party.
Well, to jump back and forth, since you mentioned Pence, what was it like to work with him or under him as governor when you were in the General Assembly? Because we've read a few articles where you've talked about that he was pretty active with the General Assembly, or that you had had some positive interactions with him. So
yes.
What was your relationship with him like?
I mean, he was a very easygoing governor by contrast to the one before him, Mitch Daniels. I got into a lot of trouble because I don't even remember what the subject matter was, but I just blurted out, Lord Shorty need to come on back here and take care of this issue. Was something that was impacting the state. And one reporter caught on to that Lord Shorty issue, and that became the talk of the whole State House and around the state about my referring to him as Lord Shorty. He made much more sense in terms of getting his agenda through, and even though it was not always fair to both parties, but at least he had control of both houses. Even the
You mean Daniels?
Daniels, I'm sorry. Yeah. But in the case of Pence, he I don't know whether he tried or just did not have that same influence as Daniels did in terms of getting both chambers that were ruled by his party to go along with his platform.
That's interesting. Okay. Well, jumping back here in the relationship between the House and the Senate, what differences, if any, were there between members in the House and the Senate?
In terms of the entire chamber, or
Yeah.
the Democrats and Republicans of the Senate and the Democrats and Republicans of the House?
Just between each chamber in general. Was there a different feel or different vibe between each one?
Very much so. Well, and mainly because the numbers alone means that it's going to be more rancor, more, because 100, and you got 100 opinions versus 50, at least that's cut in half. But and also the leadership of each chamber, how they rule. Oh, but in the House, there's always the chatter. I mean, it was just like night and day when you walk into one chamber or the other because of what everybody may be wanting to talk about or get their issue across at that time. But there are many occasions where Democrats in the House could not even get along with, or couldn't get their fellow colleagues, Democrats in the Senate, to agree with them, and was mainly because they morphed into the Republicans aren't going, if I do this, I will not be able to get my bills heard over here. That's how that chamber, the Senate chamber, ruled with the iron fist in terms of keeping even the Democrats in line. Versus, you may want to club me over the head, but you can't do it but once. And I'm going to get my point across, even though I may not be able to get that piece of legislation heard or not.
Interesting. Can you walk me through the process of generating a bill and then how you garnered support for that bill? What did that look like?
Mainly it's a matter of that maybe a person from Evansville is chair of a given committee, and here I am from the other end of the state. How do I get him to understand and appreciate that? And he's from a very small community in the southern end of the state, versus I'm from an urban area, and that's all. I think that's mainly the distinction between not just the parties, but also between legislators. That there you don't have the same issues that I have, because I'm from an urban area that suffers for lack of revenue and resources, versus you're from a very small rural area that don't have those same issues. So how do I get you to understand and appreciate that in the case of money for education, I need to have money for security. I may need to have those special programs for kids that may be falling behind, versus those same issues do not exist. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of saying, hey, I want you to come visit. I want you to actually see what I'm talking about. And that has been very helpful. At one point, for years, and this is back in the 80s and maybe the early 90s, we had legislative weekends in which one area would host all the legislators. And that's a captive audience that you would put them on buses and take them, see these roads, how beat up they are? I need this. Look at this school corporation where the buildings are falling apart. I need more money. And at the same time, we would socialize in the evening, but I always viewed those as very, very helpful to get everybody who had an interest in participating in that weekend to see what the needs are of another part of the state.
That's really interesting. Did that happen often, or?
Like I said, during the 80s, yes, and maybe into the 90s. We flip-flopped every year. I think we did it every other year, and then it would be in some northern area versus a southern area.
Interesting.
And it was referred to as the legislative weekend.
Well, how was legislative business conducted outside of formal votes and committee meetings? I mean, it sounds like some of it was done on these trips, but on the daily, what did that look like?
On a daily basis?
Yeah, how was business conducted, when you weren't on the floor voting, for instance?
Well, the nuts and bolts of all the legislation is in the committee. The committee process drives the legislature. Mm-hmm. And the important thing is to get the ear of the chair that he will hear a given piece of legislation, mm-hmm. and then to have folk other than, the lobbyists are important, but it's always important to have an actual constituent there so that it's a real live issue, mm-hmm. and interest versus those hired guns, the lobbyists mm-hmm. there. So that has been another driving point, that you really see the difference in legislators when they hear from a person that has experienced this versus just hearing it from a lobbyist. Mm-hmm. And I think that is key, but it's also a matter of, I can't have a committee chair say, we're going to hear your bill tomorrow, and I've got someone back here that can't pick up and get that 150 miles with a less than a day's notice. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing. Can you schedule this, if you have this relationship with this committee person? If you're going to hear my bill, give me advance notice so I can have an actual person down here to testify.
Sure. Did you, maybe even after the bill's moving through committee and then voting on it too. Did you have a sense of how people would vote prior to the actual voting, or what people's responses were, or was it more of a surprise when you got down to the end?
No, when we have caucus meetings, the Democrat caucus versus the Republican, that's where you get a sense for where your colleagues are that are not on that committee, that may have some hesitations or additional questions to clarify all of that prior to the actual vote on the floor.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you mentioned leadership both in the Senate but then also in the House multiple times, but what roles did party leadership play?
Not out front, not in, unless it's a statewide subject matter. Party leadership rarely had an occasion or appearance in the caucus meetings. They may meet with the leadership of the caucus and say, make sure this one goes on through or whatever. Mm-hmm. But rarely did we have visits from the state party apparatus come into the caucus mm-hmm. to express the interest or for or against mm-hmm. a piece of legislation.
Well, can you speak a little bit about House leadership or caucus leadership too? Like, how influential, in your opinion, is the Speaker of the House, or also like the head of the caucus? How did they help guide things, I guess?
Well, if the Speaker happens to be a Democrat, then it's rare that a party member would sway away from voting the way the Speaker requested you to do. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with the caucus, unless there's a big divide in the caucus on a subject matter like the guns. I mean, mm-hmm. like I said, that is not a Democrat versus Republican issue. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is just an issue that is just crazy that I will never ever fathom. Mm-hmm. But when we have a Democratic Speaker, I mean, we usually, unless we would know in advance as to whether it's going to be a straight party line vote on that. In that instance, then we would support wholeheartedly the Speaker and the Democratic issue there. And as I pointed out, rarely are there instances that we would have a split within the caucus on a given mm-hmm. issue.
Sure. You've again alluded to this a couple of different times, but do you think it's important to work with the other side, or was that done frequently?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt, it's important. I mean, it should not be. Granted, we have philosophical differences, but the fact still remains that whatever is going to happen is going to have an impact on the entire state. So, it's a matter of using the amendment. I don't mind if we amend this to soften the bill some, because you are contrary to the bill itself. It's always a matter of those partnerships that are absolutely, and that's why it's so important to have a person of a opposite party co-signing or co-authoring or co-sponsoring the bill, that at least all caucuses, both caucuses will know that there is an interest in this issue from both sides of the chamber.
Sure. What does the public not know about how the General Assembly operates?
Everything. I mean, that's always so intriguing. Well, why couldn't you get this bill through? This is what I wanted to see happen. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult to understand the mechanics of the operations of the legislature to the average person. They don't realize, mainly, cannot and do not understand the process of something that can, if I introduce the bill, it may show up, the speaker may put it on the calendar, but then he may assign it to a committee they don't match the bill and the subject matter and the committee that it's assigned to. And that's a clear indication that bill will die right away. And that's one thing that the general public does not understand. And even if, the bill is heard and the chairman has done it because this person he may need later on, but the bill may not get a vote because both caucuses that have caucused on this and said, no, this shouldn't go any farther than this because of ABC. And that's something that's very, very difficult for the general public to understand, that these caucuses have a big influence on whether, the bill has been heard, it's come out of committee, but now the entire body has to vote, and the fact that no public can discuss the bill after it leaves the committee process. I think the average person is aware, why can't I come in? No, this is now in the hands of the 100 members of the General Assembly, and all of your input had to have been at the introductory level or at the committee level.
How did your legislative service affect your family life?
Well, I was divorced. That's one thing. Divorce was first. My wife, my current wife, this is the 36 years I've been in the General Assembly. We've been married for 27 years. This is the first year that we have spent the entire year together. Now that I'm no longer in the General Assembly, because every January through March or January through April, I'm gone. And she's here. She enjoyed that. I mean, I thought it would be more of an adjustment for her, that I'm here now 12 months out of the year versus... So in our case, it wasn't that rancorous. And, I've heard others talk about the fact that my wife wants to kick me out of the house, because I'm now here for the full 12 months versus the kind of freedom. And some is the opposite, that the person retiring now has a major adjustment of not being away from their normal family life for those 3 or 4 months.
Did your wife ever come down to Indianapolis with you?
Yes,
session?
But it was a rare occasion, that she'd maybe come down once every other year, but it wasn't like some spouses that camped in down there and they were regulars sitting on the bench on the side. That was always intriguing to me, how those, and mainly wives, I don't think there was an occasion, I can't even think of one, where a husband whose wife was in the General Assembly would come and be in the chamber for a large portion of the day.
Okay.
Well, moving towards some of your specific legislation that you worked on, your committee work, what would you say was the most controversial legislative issue that you ever worked on, or one during your time in the Assembly?
The casino.
Okay.
Yeah, because Indiana is viewed as being very, very conservative, so gaming just wasn't on the radar screen, and it took 4 or 5 years to finally get even the riverboat language through, and I think it was mainly they're talking about mafia influence, because they feel that the mafia would be having control the operations of the boat, and down to even that we had the boats, all the boats were on the water, but they had to go have a schedule of going out onto the body of water. I mean, it's like they thought the mafia couldn't swim. That and gradually there were amendments over the years of saying, like a Lake Michigan, you couldn't possibly schedule. You have a schedule, but you can't follow that schedule because that water is very choppy and unruly at times. So ultimately we changed that to the boats are in the water, but you no longer have this boarding schedule. That was always chaotic. from the very beginning that people were rushing. There have been several accidents because people know that the boat leaves at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they have waited until 2:30 to try to get there, and then they got to get there and park, and then there's a cutoff point. Nope, it's 3 o'clock. You can't wait. You have to wait till the next scheduled time. I mean, we finally chipped away at many of those things that were really, really ridiculous in terms of the mechanics of operation. And then naturally, the Martin Luther King bill was probably the most controversial bill. The one that I'm most proud of is the bill that me and Senator Borst championed, and that was the tobacco settlement money. And when it was founded that by the federal government that most of the tobacco companies lied about the impact of tobacco, so they then had to repay all of the states X number of dollars. It was a formula for the illnesses caused by the people using tobacco products, and then we got billions of dollars from that settlement, the state of Indiana. And then Senator Borst and I, which was rare, he's a staunch Republican, very conservative, we agreed on a bill that says that all the money that we receive from the tobacco settlement will be used in health and health-related activities. We were the only state in the United States that did that, that dedicated, because everybody had various needs. I need to improve my roads. I don't have enough money for that. I need to put money in education. All of ours went into health and health-related activities.
Well, if I could jump back real quick to the casino issue, I mean, because that was a big issue up here in Gary in particular. I know there are other boats throughout the state too, but how much were you involved in trying to bring, or were you involved at all in terms of trying to bring casinos to Gary?
Yes. In fact, it started out with, I think, Senator, there were efforts made. Our first endeavor, and Gary was the one that championed the cause of casinos. Then there was the moving around. I think ultimately I was in the House. Back then in the 80s, a revenue generating legislation had to start in the House. So that meant then that, yes, Senator Rogers currently and Senator Mosby before her, when they were in the House, they carried the legislation. Both of them ultimately, at different periods, moved to the Senate. Still, it was a matter of it had to originate in the House. Then, still, it was a big fight and struggle because many of our colleagues did not want to talk about gaming at all, gambling at all, because it was just taboo in the state of Indiana. I'm losing track of what was the original question.
Well, I just asked what role you had played in helping the casinos in Gary.
After Senator Rogers left the House and went to the Senate, and I carried the legislation for the 2 or 3 years. And then ultimately it passed out of the House, went over to the Senate and ran into a roadblock. And I think we passed it in a special session. Finally came to a compromise during the special session as to what will be our final crafting of legislation on gaming. And I think most of it was centered around, well, who all is going to get a piece of the pie? Initially, nobody wanted it, but then when they saw all of the revenue that would be generated and brought back and left there in the local communities, it came up with, I think, 13 various communities that received the license or designation for having a riverboat. And I think back to how Indiana, this is something that's not very well known, by virtue, and the state, excuse me, when it came down to the interviewing, the legislation has passed, the interviews for who will be the license holders. Gary having 2 licenses and was the only community that had the 2 licenses because we, A, started the whole movement, B, had the greatest need. Somehow, the state, we selected 2, the guy Barton and another company, another license holder. But the state says, no, you've got 2, you're going to need a big name in order to be successful. And they kind of forced Donald Trump on us. But unbeknownst to everyone, that by the virtue of Donald Trump getting that license for an Indiana riverboat kind of saved him. I think he was going under big time at that. So he was able to parlay that license to all the finance, the banks and so forth, and say, see, I'm halfway solvent, so loan me some more money. Biggest mistake the state of Indiana ever made, giving him a license.
That didn't pan out in the long run, right? Or did the other one go under?
No, he sold. He wanted to get out after X number of years, so he sold his his license to the guy that owned the first license, and so Barton had both licenses.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Well, in terms of your legislation, which piece would you say you worked hardest on?
I would say the Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
The one that I spent the most time on, and then the number of years that it took to get it finally through.
Yeah.
And the manner in which it it finally went through. Yeah, that was the one.
Right. Sure. Could you go through and just, I guess, list the committees that you served on?
Public health. Over the years, or
We have a long list of
That's
those,
true.
but like, what would you say is the most? I think you chaired some, right? But
Yeah.
I guess what most meaningful work came out of those, or which were most important to you in terms of what you served
by
on?
far the health committee, by far.
Sure.
And then I think second would be insurance, because most of the health committee was second to Ways and Means in terms of the kinds of legislation that was introduced and the number of bills that were assigned to the health committee. I mean, we were always jumping because we had health, it was Ways and Means, health, and public policy were the 3 heavy committees that the Speaker's office would assign the most bills to.
And how did you first get involved with the health committee?
Mainly through, when I went in, was it called public health? I don't know, I have to look at that. But I just had a natural inclination to gravitate to that because I was leaving. At that time, I was the CEO of the Gary Community Mental Health Center. So I had a natural interest in health.
Right.
And that was my first choice of a committee.
Okay. And so you already talked a bit about your fight against smoking in the state of Indiana. What made you so passionate about trying to combat smoking?
Being on the health committee and seeing all seeing the negative impact of smoking to directly through people that are smoking, and then the secondhand smoke was the biggest detriment, and the fact that being educated on the drastic impact that secondhand smoke had on folks. Yeah. I mean, and still today, I don't think many folk realize that
Right.
secondhand smoke is just as bad as you being a direct puffer.
Sure.
And then now this crazy thing about we got hoodwinked into this vaping thing, that was the best thing for getting folk off of smoking, and now we find out that it has as much of a negative impact on people's lungs as smoking.
And that was something you also fought, right?
Yes.
Let's see, another big health initiative you took part in was the Healthy Indiana Plan. Could you describe the general idea of the Healthy Indiana Plan?
Once more, it was an effort to make sure that as many people as possible that currently did not have health insurance could have some kind of health coverage.
Right.
And right before that was the CHIP program, the Children's Health Program. With the big, and once more, Senator Miller, God bless her, and I have not talked to Pat Miller in a while. I mean, here we are opposite polars. I'm African American from an urban area and poor versus her Republican living in luxury in Indianapolis. But not a single piece of legislation that came through our committees did partisanship get involved in it at all. None was, and that's that's something else that is truly an untold story about how is it that the two of us could not. There was no partisanship at all in the whole health issue while we were respective chairs of the committee. The biggest struggle we had was the name of the Healthy Indiana Plan. We struggled with that because that was the first time we had partisanship come in, and that was secondary to the actual bill and the content of the bill. It just was what will be the name of it.
Sure. What about another health legislative issue? Could you tell me about Medicaid expansion and your role in that?
Once more, it was a matter of trying to make sure that folk that did not have coverage received coverage, and whether that would increase the areas of coverage. And it was a struggle mainly because whether the feds were going to approve, but how do we get around all
right.
of the roadblocks of the federal government in terms of expanding Medicaid? Everything, most things were centered around dollars. How do you pay for it?
Sure.
And, I propose increasing the cigarette tax to pay for it, and even gasoline tax, whatever, to make sure that we can get insurance for as many people as possible. Boy, I just thought about something. Some down there in my garage is early in the 70s, I introduced legislation to say we will have single payer. Everybody will have insurance coverage. It didn't fare well, but at least I got it down to there will be a study, an interim study committee, and we produced a big old loose leaf notebook on the hows and whys of single payer system. And then he loop around 20 years later, and that's the major discussion point now about.
Yeah. And why do you think those proposals failed?
People just would not educate themselves on it. How of 100, how many have a keen interest in health?
Right.
Maybe 20, but they're so far removed from what all is involved and the impact that not having health coverage has on, and then directly on you, and then indirectly on you as an individual.
Right.
So they're very difficult to educate everyone that is not directly involved. That's in the House. I'm speaking now of the House of Representatives. If we got 13 or 15 members on the health committee, you still got 85 who are not, and they all are over here struggling with their issues, be it the Ways and Means or whatever committee, and then on top of that are the issues and the pressure from their direct constituents about a different subject matters.
Right.
So that's taking them farther away from really looking at studying and getting educated on health in the state of Indiana. And it takes years to nurture and get all of that into the minds and the psyche of our colleagues about how important this issue is. And I wouldn't limit it to just health, because but there are other areas in which somebody else may have been struggling for years to get it through, and yet having difficulty in educating those that are not directly involved.
Right. Well, moving a bit away from health legislation, we noticed in 2011 you were part of the big walkout in the legislature due to the controversy over the power of unions in Indiana. Could you explain what was going on and your role in that?
Unions were an integral part. We, in the Democratic Party, felt that unions are part of our lifeblood, because they support us with revenue and bodies. So we championed their cause. It's still, the jury is out on whether we took that step too far in walking out and leaving the state in order to make sure that state police did not come after us to bring us back to the chamber to pass the legislation. And I think this was over it was a specific issue that was there that year over it wasn't collective bargaining, it was
I guess the right to work legislation.
Right to work.
Yeah.
Right to work. And so our leadership felt that strongly about the fact that we need to do whatever is necessary to try to prevent this this right to work legislation from passing. There were times when we stayed off in caucus for days, but that didn't fare too well. And so finally it was this concept of get out of the state of Indiana. And we went to Urbana. This is the result of that.
Oh my gosh.
That is really funny.
That is amazing.
That's Pat Bauer. That's Wynn Moses, and I don't know how he's selected the three of us to
that's so funny.
to harpoon us like that, but
That
that was all
great.
centered around us
my God.
leading over the right to work legislation.
That's great.
So do you remember like the specific person that first mentioned the idea of like walking out of there? Or?
I don't know which union rep.
Okay.
It was always a matter of them talking to Speaker Bauer about this whole issue. And I don't know which ones finally got his ear. If in fact we can't stop it from being voted on, then you need to get out because you can break quorum.
Right.
Now, today, with the numbers, any piece of legislation like this would zoom through both houses because of the numbers that they have is the supermajority.
Sure. See, moving on to another legislative topic, it appeared that, as you've already mentioned earlier, that you're against a lot of pro-gun legislation. Could you talk about the debates surrounding guns in the General Assembly and your role in those debates?
Most of the debates have centered around just the Second Amendment. That we have a right to bear arms.
Right.
But the forefathers did not. Yeah, they say you need to be able to protect your home and your family. But back then, they had single shot muskets, so it wasn't a matter of you could then have a weapon such as the AK-47 that you're not going to use for hunting or protecting your family. So that's the big issue, that there is a segment of the community that firmly believes that we should not change anything about that Second Amendment right. even though in their heads, in the individual heads, they know that there should not be the availability of military weapons and so forth that you see many guys carrying. And some states have been thoroughly convinced by the NRA, you need to take that a step farther, that you should be able to have a weapon, you can carry a weapon and don't have to conceal it. You can carry a machine gun or a rifle and strap it to your back and walk down the street. You can even carry it in a church. And now, I mean, that incident in, I don't know what state it was in, they had the video on television just recently about a guy walked into a house of worship, and he was shot and killed by parishioners that had their guns with them in church.
I think it's
so,
Texas.
What?
I think it's Texas.
Yeah. So that strengthens their argument that
Right.
we should be able to carry guns out. We shouldn't have to go through the gun permit process. We should just be able to carry our weapons wherever we want to. In a school, we had the big issue of even school buildings and school property at one point. And then we had another example of why that shouldn't happen, because right up here in northwest Indiana somewhere, a guy was at work and he was angry about something and went out to the trunk of his car and pulled out a gun and shot and killed some of his co-workers. So it appears as though sometimes it makes sense, but other times it does not make sense. And especially the arguments when it came down to being able to carry weapons to the workplace, that he's saying, well, I want to go hunting right after work, so why shouldn't I be able to have my weapon in the trunk of my car? Because, in fact, there was an exclusion at one point for these electronic plants and many government facilities that they're saying, no, you can't have that weapon. And on the park, even though you have it locked in the trunk of your car, it should not be on our properties. And all those have been shot down, no pun intended, by virtue of the stranglehold that the NRA and other gun groups have on not just the various state legislatures, but on the federal government as well, on this whole issue of guns and where and how they can be handled.
And would you say that, compared to when you first entered the General Assembly, has that strength for the gun lobby increased or decreased or stayed the same?
Increased, because now Indiana has passed a law that says that you can carry them into houses of worship. You can carry them. I don't think we done the one about you can walk down the street with it exposed, strapped to your hip. I don't think we've done that. But it's coming. It's coming. It's just a matter of time.
Let's see. Also, from researching your legislative career, it seems that racial equality was a subject you were working on a lot, and you were not shy about bringing up the issues in the legislature. Could you tell me about what was going on throughout your career and how you were trying to bring awareness to those issues?
I guess it goes back to the whole Martin Luther King issue of getting folks to understand, even though he had been demonized by J. Edgar Hoover as being a socialist and a commie and all that jazz. A man was trying to, and he was African American, but his appeal was for all people that were of lesser stature or with the ability to afford some of the things that were just basic human rights, to be able to feed their families and so forth.
Sure.
So those kinds of things stay with you forever and a day. I grew up very poor, and I know of the struggles of just making it through daily life, and all of those things were an integral part of my life and were very important in terms of my saying that everyone should have the equal opportunity to live a very fruitful and quality life.
Sure. Did you notice a change in racial attitudes from the start of your career to the finish of it?
But we still haven't, yes, there's been changes, but there's still a long way to go. Very long way to go. As is witnessed by the president ripped the scab off. I mean, it is still amazing to me. Most of the followers of Donald Trump today seem to be the very poor and disenfranchised white folk that are struggling in life. But they had been forced to be very quiet about the fact that I'm scared that African Americans or Mexicans are going to be the majority and going to take over. They may take my job from me. That had been kind of submerged, but now they feel that they now have that opportunity. They should be able to voice that freely. That I don't think that, back to the segregation days, I don't want him living next door to me. I don't want them to have an opportunity to work next to me. And all of that Donald Trump is exacerbating and making them feel that they should be able to voice their opinions in any way they want to, such as the Richmond situation the other day and the Charlottesville situation. All of that's coming up more and more because of the rhetoric that our president throws out there. Granted, other than those public forums, he has kind of softened his position when he opened up with, we're going to close the gate on Mexicans coming into the United States. At least some of that has, I guess within his heart it's still there, but he doesn't verbalize it as much as he had been before, except when he gets that platform. I think he just goes, wow. It's like a drug to him. He's an addict, and he gets that boost, a shot in the arm, and when he's before all those folk that marvel at him. I got kind of carried off with the subject of how do these poor folk feel that this man who says he is a billionaire can have something in common with them. It's not the matter of that he's concerned about whether they have a job or can make ends meet. It's a matter of the fact that I don't think he has much respect for minorities, all kinds, and now he's opened up the channels for hundreds and thousands of more to come out and voice your choice, because you have me as the leader of all of this, and you can feel free to express your those opinions that you have submerged. So,
sure. So how have you seen the national movements affect things on the state level in Indiana, or while you were in the General Assembly? How have you seen this evolution of sort of changes play out?
Oh, without a doubt, the salvation for racial minorities, it's still kind of under the surface, the fact that right now, and it's based upon, if we were to get a correct census count, we would probably see that people of color are the majority in the United States today. And that's what the whole white race is afraid of, that we will no longer be the majority and someone else will be in charge. Well, what's wrong with that? If that is the way the figures are, why not that? But and I can halfway understand that. I wouldn't want to lose. I wouldn't want to be in the minority if I've been in the majority all this time. But you got to go with the flow. I mean, if that's what happens, so be it. But yet, and because that's, when you look on television, when you look in any boardroom, when you look at any place where what is the hierarchy of that place, and it's going to be white males. Now, women are also raising hell. I mean, I was shocked at Obama's comments the other day about if women ruled government, we'd be in much better shape than we are right now. Now, probably is, he did not elaborate on that, but at least the point is there that women have been left out of so many opportunities in places, and so have racial minorities, and that's turning around now, slowly but surely, and it's not acceptable to those folk that were at one point the majority, and that is white males. Just cannot accept the fact that in this major boardroom, it's going to be some women. In this boardroom, there are going to be some men. How long then will it take for them to be the majority in that boardroom? Same thing in the workplace. He's going to take my job. He's just getting the same opportunity that you got years ago, that your forefathers received years ago. And that's a hard thing to get across to the average Joe.
Well, you mentioned earlier too, and of course the Black Caucus has been around for a long time in Indiana politics. And I know that you had numbers, you said, where you could, move legislation or
Yes.
prevent it going through. But, throughout your tenure, did you ever feel like you had been discriminated against in the General Assembly based on race?
No, not on race, but on the issues that I raised, which is, well, I guess maybe the same thing, that they don't want to support this Martin Luther King legislation that happens to be introduced by an African American because of what they feel threatened by that subject matter. I have never felt personally that he's not going to speak to me because I am an African American.
Mm-hmm.
Or they don't want to be on this committee because I'm the chair of the committee.
Well, looking at the Democratic Party and the changes that have happened over time, we read that in 1992 you were pretty disappointed with the Clinton administration regarding the relationship with the African American community. And you were considering at one point voting for Ross Perot, for example. What do you think of the state of the Democratic Party today, both on the national level as well as in the state of Indiana?
Very disappointed on the national level by virtue of this. And I guess, once more, it's partly our fault, the African Americans and Hispanics, the fact that all of the African Americans and Hispanics running for president have been drummed out by virtue of the set of rules that we were there at the table, maybe in a smaller minority, but had an opportunity then to say, not knowing that by virtue of my voting for these rules, it's going to impact us farther down the line, that will force us out because we can't meet all of these criteria. And I don't know the full background on why these set of rules were set up, that you had to meet these certain thresholds or you could not be on the debate stage. I didn't even realize that it's sad that nationally, how many, if I don't know, what about John Q. citizens on the street that does not know that the Bennett is still in the race, that several others that are not on the stage are still out there campaigning, and yet will they get an equal opportunity to get back on the stage or even get some votes? Because it's just out. It's no longer in the public's purview that there are other folk of that 20. Many of them are still there. Yet you just do not hear that they're not household names anymore.
Sure. And what about in the state of Indiana?
The same thing. How did Barack Obama win the state of Indiana. This very, very conservative state. So that meant that for that one occasion, did X number of Republicans say, I'm not going to follow the Republican doctrine, I'm going to be an individual and vote for him because I think he will make a good president, or what? Or is it that they're not just changing for that one time for Barack Obama, but now they're going to be more to the center in terms of their thinking? Which is going, I think Indiana will be one of the real test cases for in the presidential election, as to, is the turnout going to be there, and will the majority of the turnout be for Donald Trump, or will it be for a native Hoosier, Pete Buttigieg? Who, coincidentally, if the election were tomorrow, I'd vote for Pete Buttigieg. Which is another interesting question that needs to be researched. How long ago, or how did it happen now that those marketing firms surveyed the average citizen and say, will you accept commercial on TV that has an interracial couple on it? Will you accept the commercial on TV that has a gay couple on it? I mean, it just seemed to come out of the blue that now when you're watching television, it's commonplace to see a commercial with an interracial couple or a gay couple. How did they determine that? And it obviously their survey results showed that. And it has been sustained because you don't see folk not buying those products. I guess those companies haven't complained that I need to snatch that commercial because my product being purchased is going down. And then you move on to the Chicago situation. Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that the mayor would win because she was openly gay. Yet, the third largest city in the country has accepted a gay woman as a mayor. And you find now that obviously there are lots of gay people that were in the closet, they were just going about their life and not letting folk know about their personal choices that are now coming out. And I look at that genius young man over there in South Bend. I'm telling you that I think he stands a very, very good chance of being the nominee for President of the United States.
Interesting.
There is you've heard most of the talking heads say he can't make it because he won't get past South Carolina. Because South Carolina, the majority of the primary voters are Democrats and African Americans. I don't believe that. I know they want to hang their hat on whatever this mysterious incident that occurred when he first ran for mayor, and he fired the police chief a black police chief over some incident, and that mushrooms and morphs into a national sentiment over whether in fact he can be president. I am pleasantly surprised and happy over this whole issue of accepting a person for who they are, rather than that is something that is unacceptable because the Bible says, man, Adam and Eve, not Adam and Adam. So, Pete Buttigieg is going to be a test. He's not going to go away even if he doesn't become president. He and Lori Lightfoot, has opened the door, and the fact that they have such a following, it's going to be intriguing as to what happens, and it's going to filter on down to think about all the kids that are bullied in school because they are gay, and don't want it to be out there. They're just bullied because their classmates kind of have an inkling of this or whatever. But the world is changing. And this is one change that, I am pleasantly happy and surprised about.
So the next topic I wanted to touch upon was about it appears that in 1995 you wanted to abolish the death penalty. What was going on at the time in the legislature about that topic?
2 episodes right here in Gary. The little girl, even though that was just over the top, when the little girl stabbed the lady who opened up her house to them, and then another case of a guy who I have regular contact now with, who killed a police officer in a bank robbery. But why should we make a decision about taking a life for a life? I mean, that to me just does not sit well, that we should make those kind of decisions. And then mainly from the standpoint, it was so lopsided that they mostly African Americans and racial minorities were on death row. That was my major interest. And then the fact that also right at that time, it was a matter of several groups were finding out that they were not the guilty party, or they did not get a fair trial before getting there on death row.
Sure.
Even though I'm contrary to our county prosecutor, the highest office holder here, he's in favor of the death penalty, and he's an African American. That's his choice. But I am opposed to the death penalty. Was then in '95 and still opposed to it.
Yeah.
The question has often been raised with me. Well, what if it were your daughter or your loved one or a close friend of yours was shot and killed or harmed by someone? Would you still have that position? Yes. I don't think that we should take someone's life because of something that they've done.
I guess the last topic I wanted to discuss was you had legislation for teen suicide prevention. Can you tell me about how that legislation came about and perhaps its impact it's had on the state?
At one point, there was a period where there was an exorbitant number of teen suicides or attempt suicide. Most of it centered around self respect and bullying. The kids were just not feeling good about themselves and were making serious efforts to take their own lives. I said there should be, I felt at that point and still feel today that we need to provide more services and more revenue to educate and direct kids to the point where they have more self-respect and then that they should be able to, especially the bulliers should be the ones that are getting more attention as to the hows and whys of you may make the decision to bully. They don't feel good about themselves, It's a matter of same way it is with racism. Most of the people that want to look down on a class of people, a race of people, is because they don't feel good about themselves. Everybody wants to be able to have their foot on somebody else's neck. And the same thing with the kids that are bullying. They don't feel good about themselves. They are doing that because it takes the attention away from them and whatever their shortcomings may be. So why not provide some services or some training or some other things that are needed to get rid of that feeling of no self-respect.
Mm-hmm. And I know so this was in 2010 when you sponsored this legislation. Did you notice sort of an uptick in the problems going on with teen suicide at that time, or was it always pretty persistent?
I think it was consistent across the board. It's just that you said now is the time to at least let's give more attention to this.
Sure. I guess one other question. What do you think was the biggest hurdle you had to overcome while you were in office?
The ups and downs, the peaks and valleys of being in the majority and out of the majority. Like that's one of the reasons why I left this time. I said, boy, after 36 years and we keep going up and down, and now it appears as though the supermajority is the thing now. And you know, you cannot even legitimately or at least equally debate or talk about a subject matter because it's like you're not even there. You know, they don't have to. They don't pay attention to you at all because they've got the numbers.
Right.
They may get a couple of peel-offs, just like the whole debate on whether the U.S. Senate is going to support these impeachment articles. Many of them within know that is something that needs their attention and their vote, but then they want to go along to get along. And it doesn't make any sense anymore. There should be another vehicle for us making decisions right here in Indiana and avoid having issues like this of the super majorities that just means that it's just one side, nothing else.
You just said you sort of decided not to run again in the last election. Was that a hard decision for you? Is that something you had been thinking about for a while, or what was your thought process there?
Well, two things. I'm getting up there in age, and that 150-mile trek every week was weighing on me. And this, and the age thing is just mine personally. I don't think that a person should be removed or not considered for office because of their age. Because you got to think about all the experience that you're losing by virtue of saying that this person should not be considered or shouldn't be able to run again because of their age. But the main issue with it comes a time where you need to there needs to be a training ground and allowing for, and I regret the fact that I did not have a mentee that I could bring along to this point of saying that, okay, now you have seen what I have done, you've heard what I want to do. Now, if that is your desire to do this, understand and appreciate all the pros and cons of that and the good and bad that comes out of it. But I just felt that it was my time. And I think about 36 years, and there were only, I think, maybe there were 5 that had more time. I know both Bill Crawford and the guy that was Ways and Means that left a couple of years ago, right after Bill Crawford, I can't think of his name. You don't find folks serving that number of years anymore. You know, either by choice or the fact that they lose to someone else for whatever reason. But 36 years is a long time in one place.
Mm-hmm. How would you summarize your time overall as a state legislator?
It was an enjoyable experience, be it in the minority or the majority. The fact that you impact lives in the manner in which you do as an individual state legislator, and the fact that many people are aware of that and they voice their pleasure or displeasure at what you may do or have done in that period of time. I enjoyed the camaraderie being over the years. I miss the people there, but the process, I just felt it was time to give that up.
Do you have a favorite story or anecdote during your time as a legislator?
Favorite story. Senator Larry Borst and I it was the last night of the General Assembly, and we were debating. There was a debate on the tobacco settlement issue. Before sometime during the committee process, and everyone, are you familiar with the name Larry Boyce?
Oh, yeah.
He was iron pants. I mean, Larry, he was very smart. He was a veterinarian, but he knew the numbers. He was always the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. When we were meeting on the Tobacco Settlement Committee, and that was my first encounter directly. I had always known the name and heard the name Larry Boyce. And one day were having a discussion in the committee about it, about the issue. And I said, Larry, before this is all over, I'm going to have you wearing an earring and with a beard. And I'll always refer to him as my brother. At the vote, the final vote, I think it was the last bill, right before midnight on the last day, and Larry was up presenting the bill to the Senate, and he stopped mid. And if you're not familiar with the state Senate, you know that they're very stuffy. It's very stuffy chamber over there. I mean, they don't go off the record on anything. And Larry said, it stopped mid-sentence and said, oh, I see my brother has entered the chamber. And he continued to present the bill. One of the senators, I don't know whether it was Vi Simpson or Rose Antis at that point, walked up to him and gave him an earring. And he clipped it on his ear. Now, that was unheard of in the stuffy Senate to have that kind of frivolity going on in the middle of all the. I still can't believe that none of the still cameras or the stations captured that moment. I have not been able to find any of that, but that to me was a cameo moment. I mean, that was a moment to capture forever in a day.
That's funny. It's a good story. What lessons, if any, did you learn?
That everybody's an individual, and that I may be angry as hell at John because he did not or would not support my legislation, and vice versa. He bring up something like the gun issue, and it's very distasteful to me. But the point is that somewhere there's something that we have in common. And that there's no such thing as permanent enemies, just permanent interests.
You mentioned this at a couple different points, but do you have any specific regrets as a legislator in terms of legislation or just in general?
Regrets about what? A piece of legislation?
Yeah, or something maybe you weren't able to do, or something that happened, or...
Yes, that... all the years of fighting for no smoking in Indiana, we are finally being able to get it through that you cannot smoke in a public place. I still, as was walking out the door, still trying to get all places there's no smoking in Indiana. And that's the one thing I regret not being able to get through, that there should be no. I see now we're backing up because I see there's now the whole thing of vaping and they're saying, but I sure wish we could, or someone would pick up the mantle on this whole issue of in bars and restaurants and in the casinos that there should not be any smoking. Even though I was an integral part of the casino riverboat legislation, I have never gone for the purpose of gaming because of the smoke. I walk through or have meetings there, or in the case of the horseshoe up here, you have to go through the venue if you're going to go to their concert hall. But because it's still a trip to me to walk out of that place and your clothes are reeking with that smell. You have to leave them in the garage or not immediately hang them back up in your closet because of the smell of smoke. And that is one of my biggest regrets, not being able to say that Indiana is totally smoke-free.
What, in your opinion, is the most important work of the Indiana General Assembly?
Making sure that every citizen, we improve the quality of life for all Hoosiers, that we do no harm, and that we absolutely make sure that there are laws that can stand the test of time.
What advice would you give to future legislators or even current legislators in office?
Hold on to what your beliefs are, and make sure that you understand and appreciate the fact that there are going to be disagreements, and that you're not going to get 100% on it, but accept the fact that we all are there to represent our constituency, and that whatever you are doing, it is what the majority of your constituents want done.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We just have just a few questions here left because we have been at it for a while, but how would you say the state of Indiana has changed over the course of your lifetime, or at least since you've been here in the 60s?
As it relates to the General Assembly or outside of
just the state in general?
Well, you don't see the outward hostilities between groups. You know, there was a period of time when I would not dare think of going to, where is Foley from? What was that community that was noted for African Americans being able to go through there? Wherever Ralph Foley was the state representative. I mean, it was a running joke that, you know, African Americans, but obviously there's been a softening of views there. I still maintain that we need to accept each individual as an individual human being, and don't just look at the color of my skin. Look at what's inside of me.
How would you say the General Assembly has changed?
Outside of have a super majority, there have been many rule changes that makes things more palatable in terms of the whole process. I still maintain that we should be like other states, not trying to cram everything into that 3.5 months. Spread it out. Even though many of my colleagues don't want to be full-time legislators, and mainly because concerned about what it would cost us. But it makes much more sense to me to say that we work year-round to do the improved lives and issues for people, rather than rushing through things, especially in this short session. I mean, it's impossible for you to do a thorough and good job when you know that you only have this 2.5 months to do it. So why not become a full-time, like Congress does, like many of the states, our neighboring states do, that we work at these things year-round.
What, if any, enduring qualities do Hoosiers still have or hold dear?
Where did the name Hoosier come from? That's a major question.
Yeah, no one still has the full answer there.
And granted, we are all, each state is different. I mean, outside of each county people have different views. Mm-hmm. Every state have different views. And I think Indiana has held on to the fact that we are Midwest, and that we're different from Ohio and Illinois and Kentucky, that we are still people that believe that we should be protective of our basic rights and beliefs, and that we have come a long way in terms of getting the negative things like the home of the Ku Klux Klan, and made those folk that have those extreme views, we have them kind of submerge those views. Even though that may not be, rather than trying to get them out of those, we force them into a smaller settings where they're not as vociferous with those views and points of view that they may have. But they are resurfacing, I think, and it's mainly because of our president. That there is a feel that they are unleashed again, and they can do and say whatever they want to.
What do you want Hoosiers to know about their role in relation to the function of the General Assembly?
That they have as much power as they want to have. That individual vote means a lot, and that they should feel free to have contact with their individual senator or representative on something that is of very importance and value to them. I mean, I often tell folk, you don't know how powerful you are. That while I'm sitting there in the Indiana General Assembly and my staff comes to me with a stack of phone messages, and all of them are centered around, most of them centered around one subject matter, something that I had not been giving much attention, but I said, boy, I better find out more about this. If all of my constituents are saying yay or nay on this particular subject matter, I think that those that are outside of the donut of Indianapolis really don't pay much attention to the general workings, only when it's something that will impact their pocketbook or their health. And yet still, if I'm back here and I have a forum and say, I need all of you to place these calls or at least to vote on this issue, they still don't realize the importance of that because they're so far removed distance-wise from Indianapolis, and don't realize that still you have as much impact as that person that lives right there in Indianapolis. If you just need to take advantage of it and use that power.
Well, that was really the end of my questions, or our questions rather, but I wanted to ask you earlier, you mentioned an early memory about politics of your mother crying when FDR had passed away, and then of course of Mayor Hatcher asking you to join his administration. But when did you decide to be a member of the Democratic Party? When did you come into that specifically?
And that's an interesting question when of late you hear more about decades ago, the Republican Party was the one where African Americans were members of, and I haven't researched when did that change occur that we left the Republican Party and joined the Democratic Party, and what were the issues then that were so germane to us that we were in the Republican Party, and what happened that flipped us over. I haven't a clue about what brought all that on. It's just now, it's like Hatfields and McCoys, that we seem to clash, and what will bring us closer together, that we no longer rely on party labels to determine what's good for the whole state or for the United States of America. And something that we all need to work on. Why do we have parties, two parties, and mainly two parties? Some states have 3 or 4. But we basically have two parties that seemingly clash rather than sitting down and saying, what is it that we can do to bring us closer together? Or what is the compromise? What is that middle ground for the two of us?
Ben, did you have any more specific questions that we...
No, not off the cuff, no.
Well, we've asked you a whole lot of things. Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to talk on or elaborate on at all?
No, I think we've covered the waterfront thing.
Okay.